This is Mr. Ingerson. How are you doing? This lesson is about the Protestant Reformation. You see that up in the left-hand corner of the sheet here. A couple words just to take note of. Root word of Protestant is protest. That's right. This whole event called the Protestant Reformation hinges on people protesting the Catholic Church. Today we're going to be looking at why people wanted to protest the Catholic Church, like what was going on. This event happened around the year 1500, so circa 1500, so about 500 years ago. It's also known as the Reformation, root word reform, and reform means to change something. So these are people that were protesting the Catholic Church and trying to change it. The result is that the church doesn't change, and instead we get a bunch of new churches. And those churches are called Protestant churches. They include the Methodist Church, they include the Baptist Church, the Episcopalian Church, the Presbyterian Church, churches that are very common and even exist in Salem today. So this is really very relevant in terms of just driving through Salem and seeing all these churches. This is the reason it started 500 years ago. Okay, so first off, you're looking at the map here in the upper left-hand corner. The Holy Roman Empire was in the middle of Europe, and then below it were the Italian city-states. Well, if you would, go ahead down there by location and write that blank was the center of the Catholic Church. In Europe, there was only one church in 1500, and it was the Catholic Church. And the city that was the center of the church was Rome. Rome, and that's why sometimes the Catholic Church is known as the Roman Catholic Church. Same thing. And of course, the head of that is the Pope. The Vatican City is now the middle of Rome, and you can see here from this map that Rome is the middle of Italy, and inside of Italy, inside of Rome, is this little small city called Vatican City. Vatican wasn't created until a very, very long time after this period. At the time, the Pope owned more than Vatican. He actually owned all of Rome and the area around it. But at this time in history, in 2017, just Vatican is owned by the Pope. By the way, the Pope's country inside of Rome today only has a population of 842 people. It is the smallest country in the world. But before, back at this time, 500 years ago, the Pope owned all of Rome. Everything you're seeing in this picture was owned by the Pope. Okay, go to the church hierarchy chart there. And so just a little background on the church. The Pope was the top. He was the head. He was basically like a dictator. I mean, he literally controlled everything. Kings bowed down and kissed his ring. Matter of fact, if you look on the right-hand side here, this is Pope Francis wearing the famous fisherman's ring that popes have worn for centuries. And people literally would go up to him and kiss his ring. And if you see this picture right here on the right, this painting showed a king bowing down and getting ready to kiss the Pope's ring. In this case, he was like wearing it around his neck, not his actual finger. And so the people of the Catholic Church believed that he represented God on earth, that he spoke for God, and the things that he said from the Bible were always true, and that the Pope had the power to send people to heaven or hell. There is no Pope listed in the Bible. However, this position came about as head of the Catholic Church centuries after the death of Christ. But truly, in 1500, the most powerful man in the world was the Pope. Okay, on the chart here, you see Pope. Underneath it is another group of people called cardinals. They're underneath the Pope. They work for the Pope. They might be in charge of an entire country for the Catholic Church. The popes here, there's 211 of them today. There's a couple different cardinals in the United States, for example, but they're in charge of like a country. They get together and choose the new pope. So if a pope dies, the cardinals choose him. This was the same thing back then. Every pope at one point had been a cardinal prior to them. And yes, of course, they wear red. All right, under the cardinals are bishops. They're in charge of multiple churches or maybe a city. And then underneath them are priests. The priests run the local church. So this is the church hierarchy. None of them could marry. They were all supposed to say without any marriage whatsoever because they're supposed to be married to the church. Go up above where you see the word church corruption. The problem with this power was that it got abused. Although the Pope is supposed to be a holy man, there were lots of people who ran the church that were not holy whatsoever, and they engaged in corruption. If you haven't already done so, above the word corruption, write cheating people. To be corrupt is to be someone who rips people off. And sadly, the Catholic Church ripped people off. They would purposely lie to people in order to get more money. And people would believe it because they were illiterate and they couldn't read the Bible. Only people in the church actually could read the Bible, and the Bible was also in Latin, so that made it even harder to access. The church is going to cheat people by selling something called indulgences. Please go ahead and write that down. Very important vocab word, indulgences. And the sale is going to cause major conflict. An indulgence, basically, on the left-hand side, you see like sins. So if you committed some sort of sin, like you stole, you lied, you committed adultery, whatever it was, the church taught at this time, around 1500, that you could buy an indulgence, this slip of paper on the right, this is an actual indulgence, you could buy this slip of paper, and the priest would sign it, and this gave you forgiveness for sin, and therefore you could still go to heaven. So basically the church was selling forgiveness so you could go to heaven. So this document right here, people would buy them up, and again, they couldn't read or write. They were illiterate. So they believed that the church was telling them the truth, that, well, yeah, the way to get to heaven is to buy this piece of paper. A horrible thing to lie to people about how to get to heaven. Christians, again, we've learned that Christians believe that if you believe in Christ and you have faith that he rose from the dead, that saves you from your sin. But the church here is lying to them and telling them you have to buy a slip of paper. To make it even worse, around 1500, this priest on the left-hand side named John Tetzel, he actually began to sell indulgences and told people that they could buy indulgences for dead relatives. So like your Aunt Bessie, she like dies, and you could like buy her an indulgence so she could go to heaven. So you could buy an indulgence for a dead person. And it sounds crazy, but that's what it was. He also coined a phrase. Over here on the left-hand side, you see his hand on a box. That was called the coffer. That was where you put your money in at church. And on the right-hand side is from a movie of John Tetzel, with an indulgence, and he's telling people to buy them. He actually had a phrase, and it was this: a coin in the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory springs. So write that down. A coin in the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory springs. See, the church taught that if you didn't commit a really bad sin, then you didn't go directly to hell. But at the same time, since you committed a bad sin, then you went to a place called purgatory. So, by the way, this isn't in the Bible. This is just something the church started teaching people that wasn't in the Bible. And so if you didn't go to heaven, didn't go to hell, you went to purgatory. And so John Tetzel said, oh, well, if your aunt didn't go to heaven and she didn't go to hell, or your grandmother or your mother, whoever, your sister, then you can buy an indulgence and you can release their soul from purgatory and they go to heaven then. So you could literally buy heaven for a dead person. That's what they were teaching. This is corruption because it was a big old lie. Here's a picture with in the phrase, the coin in the coffer rings. So if they hear the money dinging in the box, a soul from purgatory, this magical place between heaven and hell, supposedly, then they will spring forth, they will come release. Spring means to like release them, and they will get to go to heaven. And here's in this picture, you see someone who's working from the church holding something in their hand, and it's like an indulgence, and here's like a big box they put their money in. Unbelievable. So here's just the church was teaching that there's earthly life on the left, heaven, hell, or you could go to purgatory. And if you do enough time in purgatory, you go back to heaven later after you die. Just nothing that's mentioned in the Bible. Okay, so the church is teaching this. This causes major conflict. And to make it worse, upper right-hand corner, please, there was lots of conflict. The church made it worse by making sure the Bible and all church services were in Latin. So if you went to church and you were in England, your church service was in Latin. If you were in Germany and you went into a church service, it was in Latin. And the Bible had to be in Latin, not English, not German. In fact, there were some dissenters, and of course a dissenter is someone who speaks out against something that is wrong. And there was oh, here's the Bible, and this is Latin here. So all Bibles had to be in Latin. In fact, picture on the right, you see them burning books. They're burning the Bible. The church, the Catholic Church, burned the Bible if it was not written in Latin. So just, again, wrap your head around that. The Catholic Church burned Bibles. Okay, that sounds corrupt too. There was an early guy named John Wycliffe. He was an Englishman, and I want you to remember this hook. Ready? Wycliffe, why not? Wycliffe, why not? Wycliffe, why not? Why not do what? Translate the Bible into English. John Wycliffe was an English priest, and he read the Bible, and he was like, I want everybody to read the Bible. And so he started to translate the Bible into English. He will get himself into a lot of trouble with the Catholic Church. In fact, the Catholic Church said, well, you don't want, like, people reading the Bible, because in this picture you see a butcher on the left and a baker on the right, and he says a butcher and baker, they might start reading the Bible in church. Could you imagine that? Like, you don't want the butcher and the baker reading the Bible. That would be crazy. And so the Catholic Church burned Wycliffe's Bibles. They actually went and collected them all and burned them. Yeah. In fact, this is Wycliffe on the left. On the right, 13 years after Wycliffe's death, a new pope came to office, and he was still mad about Wycliffe, so he had Wycliffe's bones unburied and then burned. The belief the Catholic Church had was that if you burned someone's bones and you cremated them, they couldn't go to heaven. So so they went and they unburied his body and then, like, burned his bones 13 years later, like, you're not going to heaven, Wycliffe. So Wycliffe is an early dissenter from the church, and all his Bibles got burned, or most of them did, I should say. A second guy named Jan Hus, he's Czechoslovakian, and he hated indulgences, and he spoke out against indulgences. So Hus hates indulgences. Remember this, Hus hates. Hus hates. Hus hates what? Indulgences. And so Hus, as you can see in the picture here, the Catholic Church went and found him in Czechoslovakia and burned him alive in front of people. Yeah, nice. And so that was what the Catholic Church did. The Catholic Church, what would Jesus do? To them, it was burn people. No, that's not good. The church had great political power and money. You see here a picture of a building. That's St. Peter's Basilica. That's what the indulgences were used to build. So that huge building was beautiful. John Tetzel was raising money by selling indulgences to build that. And so they were using all this money that they were lying to people to get money to build beautiful buildings for the Pope to live in. And there's St. Peter's Basilica today. And the Pope also had gold armor, fully gold armor for himself. Okay. Conflict on the left-hand side. Germans and English nobility are also angry that almost everybody in the church, whether cardinals or all the popes, different popes at each time, they all were Italian. And so Germans and English are also going to start getting mad, and they're going to want their people to be named to positions in the church, like bishops and cardinals. And so that's going to start. Almost every person we talk about after this that's going to rebel against the church, they're going to be mostly German or English. So remember that. They're getting mad that the Pope is cheating people and that almost everyone in the church is Italian. So to finish up, in the right-hand corner, the main point here is that for centuries, the Roman Catholic Church had very little competition in religious thought and action. Just like no one competed against them at all. And the resistance of the church led to this event called the Protestant Reformation. And again, remember Protestant, root word, protest. Go, please, and do your practice now. Make sure you get at least an 80 on it. If not, do it again, and maybe even do it till you get 100. Thank you.